Oh, freedom over me. And before I'll be a slave, I'll be buried in my grave and go home to my Lord and be free. Fable has it that if the surviving lions don't tell their story, the hunters will get all the credit. I want to share with you a story of one of the greatest lions in our pride. In 12 years and 4 months, from 1956 to April 4th, 1968, with the exception of Abraham Lincoln and the Emancipation Proclamation, the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. may have done more to achieve racial, political, social justice, and economic equality and access to economic opportunity than any other event or person in the previous 400 years' history of the United States. I am sometimes asked, Professor Jones, who do you think today is most like Martin Luther King Jr.? So I answer the question with my own question. Who today do you think is most like Michelangelo? Like Mozart? Like Copernicus? Like Galileo? Shakespeare? No one. And just to make my point clear, and I want to be sure that you here understand the position in the pantheon of American history. If you were fortunate enough to be alive during that 12-year period, if you were fortunate enough, then let me explain to you metaphorically what I just said. If you went outside at midnight and looked up at the sky during that 12-year period, and you saw the sky covered with stars, but you saw suddenly a shooting star of such incandescent brightness, brighter than any star you'd ever seen in the heavens. That star, my friend, was the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. We will never, never, ever, ever see that shooting star in a millennium or in our lifetime. St. Augustine said, "Hope has two beautiful daughters. Their names are anger and courage. Anger at the way things are, and courage to see that they do not remain the way they are." Notwithstanding the innovative progress in diagnostic medicine, treatment of illnesses, advances in the technology of communications and terrestrial travel and in outer space, and in the production of food and shelter, the existential challenge of the 21st century that Dr. King presents to us is whether or not we will commit ourselves to the current and future policies of governance that encourage and foster violence or nonviolence as a rational choice for resolving our disputes or resolving the disputes between nations and people. In a speech in 1967 captioned America's Chief Moral Dilemma, he said, quote, "We suffer from a kind of poverty in spirit which stands in glaring contrast to our scientific and technological abundance. We have learned to swim the seas like fish, fly the air like birds, yet we have not learned the simple art of walking the earth like brothers." The legacy of Martin Luther King Jr.'s commitment to nonviolence remains unequivocal and unambiguous. This legacy is predicated on his belief that our ability to survive internationally and domestically is limited to only two choices: nonviolence or non-existence, nonviolence or co-annihilation. We gather here today only a few days before the 50th anniversary of his call to us to dream to be the best that we can be. When will we rise up in one loud collective voice and say in response to this legacy, once and for all, that the choice of violence is not an option to resolve the inevitable disputes and conflicts that will occur among us in society? The defining issue today is not those rights and protections guaranteed under the Second Amendment to our Constitution. No, it's not the Second Amendment. It's the moral injunction of the sixth of the biblical commandments: thou shalt not kill. Nonviolence, as we have heard earlier, is based on love. Nonviolence based on love does not mean we love people because we like them or their attitude, acts and ways that appeal to us. We love them because God loves them. Love as the foundation of nonviolence means that we have the capacity to love the person who does the evil deed while hating the deed that he or she does. Philip Cosino, in his book Beyond Forgiveness, Reflections on Atonement, reminds us, throughout history, people have had to make difficult, even heart-rending decisions about how to respond to the suffering they have endured at the hands of other human beings, or the pain they themselves have inflicted upon other people. And he says, quote, over and over we are confronted with the dilemma of how to respond to the cruelty and suffering that can pervade our lives. Do we forgive or do we retaliate? Should we make peace or exact revenge? Can we live alongside our enemies or do we seek retribution? The instinct to be vindictive may be as old as stone, but the impulse toward the reconciliation runs like an ancient underground river. And of course, who can forget the profound challenge presented to us in Simon Wiesenthal's book, The Sunflower, on the possibilities and limits of forgiveness? Simon Wiesenthal asked a number of world leaders and great thinkers to respond to the question he posed to them, and that question was, you are a prisoner in a concentration camp. A dying Nazi soldier asked you for forgiveness. What would you do? In December 1964, when he was being presented with the Nobel Peace Prize in Oslo, Norway, Gunnar Jarn, then chairman of the Nobel Peace Committee, said in talking about Dr. King, he says, quote, Luther King's name will endure for the way in which he has waged his struggle, personifying in his own conduct the words that were spoken to mankind. Whosoever shall smite thee on thy right cheek, turn to him the other also. In Gandhi's teaching, this talking about Dr. King, he found the answer to a question that had long troubled him. How does one set about carrying out a social reform? I found, he says, quoting Dr. King, that in the nonviolence resistance philosophy of Gandhi, the only morally and practically sound method open to oppressed people in their struggle for freedom is nonviolence. If we assume that mankind has a right to survive, then we must find an alternative to war and destruction. In describing Dr. King, Gunnar Jarn continued, quote, he is the first person in the Western world to have shown us that a struggle can be waged without violence. He is the first to make the message of brotherly love a reality in the course of his struggle, and he has brought his message to all men and all nations and all races. The specific challenge to conferences like this is that we who are gathered here, and who, by the way, as adults are trustees of our most precious asset, our children, we who are gathered here, the challenge is that we do not become inadvertently just another exercise in a long line of paralyses of analyses without developing a prescription for effective, immediate, and near-term pragmatic action. for positive change to stop the violence. It is sometimes said, as a reference I heard Ariana say earlier, that the classic example of insanity is a repetitive application of the same social and political policies to the same problems in expectation of achieving a different result. Our nation is awash in guns. There are more guns in America than people. This is the background canvas against which the disease of violence continues to spread largely unabated throughout many communities in our nation today. In too many instances, violence lies like molten lava beneath the surface of our society, just waiting to erupt. We can choose to be bystanders, cover our eyes and ears, or become proactive to meet the challenge that Dr. King's legacy commitment to nonviolence presents to us. Firearms are the leading cause of death in the United States. I listened carefully to the various presentations of scientists yesterday and yesterday evening. I thought to myself that I am truly blessed to be in the presence and hear the innovative thinking that would have pleased, for example, my own professor, Linus Pauling, my college chemistry professor, or the Nobel Prize winner, Professor Polycarp Kush, who was my professor of physics. Then it occurred to me that there really is the possibility that we can in fact meet the challenge arising from the legacy of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Violence is a contagious social disease. And now for the first time in the 21st century, thanks to my having been given the opportunity to look into this window that this extraordinary brother, Deepak Chopra, has opened to me, I now know that we have scientists who at least have the capacity to address and possibly develop a new paradigm, never before successfully implemented to stop the violence. If the studies of neuroscience can explore the outer frontiers of the brain, cognition, intellect, our psychic state, surely we can examine and develop a protocol that can address successfully the 24/7 ubiquitous disease of gun violence that's plaguing our nation. Last night, I also witnessed a scientist who got up from his chair and creatively danced to the music being presented. I implore you, I urge you to collectively respond to Dr. King's legacy by leading our nation in a dance to end nonviolence. There can be brains for nonviolence, not violence. There should be an application to promote nonviolence and not gun violence. I implore you, let's save our society before the end of civilization as we may know it in 2060. Since the mid-1970s, California, for example, prison population has grown by 75%, driven by the sentencing laws based on fear and ignorance and a lot of violent guns. The crime and the violence occurring in various cities and states throughout our nation. It occurs in communities that have names like Oakland, Richmond, San Francisco, San Jose, Stockton, and Compton, California, and nationwide cities like Philadelphia, Miami, New York, New Orleans. Many of these communities are adjacent or near the headquarters of major corporations and their chief executives like Oracle, Samsung, Facebook, Google, Cisco, Wells Fargo, Intel, Hewlett-Packard, Twitter, LinkedIn, everything, etc. Dr. King was a minority dreamer with a majority vision. He challenged us to be the best that we can be as a nation, to end the contradiction between the reality of how African Americans were treated for years in America and the promises and precepts enshrined in our Declaration of Independence and Constitution. He was the moral compass of our nation, pointing the way from segregation and institutional racism of the 20th century to the bridge across the 21st century based on a color-irrelevant, multiracial society predicated on the pursuit of excellence and the respect for one another, irrespective of gender, ethnicity, sexual preference, age, or religion. You know, the speech that Dr. King gave almost 50 years ago, the so-called I Have a Dream speech, is celebrated as it should be. But there was a speaker who spoke immediately before Dr. King at the foot of the Lincoln Memorial nearly 50 years ago. And he was Rabbi Yakov of the American Jewish Congress, one of the participating sponsor organizations of the March on Washington. Part of what Rabbi Prinz said then is just as relevant and timely today. He said, and I quote, "When I was a rabbi of the Jewish community in Berlin under the Hitler regime, I learned many things. The most important thing I learned under those tragic circumstances was that bigotry and hatred are not the most urgent problem. The most urgent, the most disgraceful, the most shameful, and the most tragic problem is silence. America must not become a nation of onlookers. America must not remain silent." During the end of the 20th century and the first decade of the 21st century, the debate has continued and does continue about the efficacy of nonviolence versus violence to bring about fundamental social and political change. In 2010 and 2011, two scholars, Erica Chenoweth and Maria J. Steffen, did an analysis of the success and failure of nonviolent movements versus those that were initiated and based on violence. In their book, Why Civil Resistance Works, The Strategic Logic of Nonviolence, Conflict, they examined 323 major nonviolent and violent cases from the year 900 to 2006. Movements seeking regime change, the expulsion of foreign occupiers, or succession. They found, based on their careful historical study, quote, that nonviolent resistance has been strategically superior to violent resistance during the 20th and the 21st centuries, from 50 to 70% of the time. They then asked the question, quote, what explains the success of nonviolent resistance campaigns relative to violent campaigns? The answer they found was, and I quote, that a critical course of the success of nonviolent resistance was mass participation, which can erode or remove a regime's main source of power when the participants represent diverse sectors of societies. For several years, I had the opportunity and privilege to serve as one of the principal advisors, a draft speechwriter for my beloved brother, Dr. Martin Luther King, Jr. There was a time when there were many speeches and many subjects that we considered, particularly dealing with the question of violence versus nonviolence. We were very mindful of President Kennedy's opinion or statement, paraphrasing Thomas Jefferson when he said that those who make peaceful revolution impossible make violent revolution inevitable. On April 4th, 1967, 1 year before his assassination, Dr. King delivered a speech at the Riverside Church of the Committee of Concerned Laymen and Clergy. It was his first extensive public discussion of the then war in Vietnam. The speech was captioned, "Time to Break the Silence." Quote, over the past 2 years, as I have moved to break the betrayal of my own silence and to speak from the burnings of my own heart, as I have called for radical departures from the destruction of Vietnam, many persons have questioned me about the wisdom of my path. At the heart of their concerns is this query, is a query in which they ask me often loud and in letters, Why are you speaking about war, Dr. King? Why are you joining the voices of dissent, etc.? In 1967, in a speech right here, not in Los Angeles, but in the Fairmont Hotel in San Francisco, he said, "Our nation is so rich, so affluent, we often fail to see the poor. So many white people don't see the poor because they are busy getting to the suburbs, to the fresh air of the suburbs. They go into the city and work, and then they get on the expressway and go back home. They never see the poor Negro who is struggling, devoid of hope. There are some Negroes who don't see the poor either. There are some Negro members of the middle class who somehow sail the flotsam out of the muddy waters and move into the fresh flowing waters of the mainstream. They have forgotten the stench of the backwaters and the ghettos of our nation, and the least of these. We must be concerned about the least of these." Who are the least of these? They are the thousands and millions of people living on the outskirts of hope, who feel that life is a long and desolate corridor with no exit sign. Who are the least of these? They are the brothers and sisters who do not have wall-to-wall carpet, who must live with wall-to-wall rats and roaches. They are those men who walk the streets in search of jobs that do not exist. Who are the least of these? There are those who have given up because so many doors have been shut in their faces. They are those men who walk the streets in search of jobs, as I said, that do not exist. Who are the least of these? They are those men who have soon become embarrassed and humiliated because they can't support their families, because they can't feed their children and educate them. Out of humiliation, they often desert their families, and the long night of illegitimacy comes into being. Who are the least of these? They are the brothers and sisters who, out of agony and the harshness of their everyday life, try to escape through dope and alcoholism and through prostitution. As I walk through the ghettos and look at my brothers and sisters who may be dope addicts and who may be alcoholics because of the system, I stand there not in arrogance before them, but I look at them and say, "But for the grace of God, there go I." Deepak, providence and destiny has placed a great responsibility before you and those extraordinary minds that you have assembled in sages and scientists. I don't know of any other person or any other group of people in the nation today that has the capacity to develop that, as I said earlier in my remarks, that protocol, that looking into changing the consciousness, that looking into thinking how we change about things, what we do in relation to violence and nonviolence. I know of no better person, no organization or group who are better equipped to do this than you, my brother. And I know this. I know this may be, you may say, well, why is Professor Jones saying this to me? That's laying a heavy thing on my head. Well, I say it to you because you carry on the legacy of Gandhi. Martin King carried on the legacy of Gandhi, and I've tried to carry on the legacy of Dr. King. So let me say here, I've been blessed with the fortuitous accident of longevity. If Dr. King had been alive today, he would be 84. I'm 82. And so my pledge to you in commemoration of the 50th anniversary, my pledge to you is that I offer myself 24/7 as a soldier, as a partner, any way I can help you to do what I know you have the capacity to do. I've seen it. I've seen those scientists. You are right on the cutting edge. When it will occur, I don't know, but you're on the cutting edge of when you have the capacity to develop a paradigm that says it's not about violence, but it's about nonviolence, and it's based upon love. We may not be there yet, but I can see that we will get there, and you have the capacity to do it. God bless you, my brother.